So these are the incredible Ajanta Caves, an incredible complex of 30 rock-cut temples nestled away in a remote Indian valley. And some of these caves were carved out while completely in the dark. And how they made this masterpiece is going to shock you. This place is so sacred that even today it's off limits to non-Hindus. But luckily for us, we were able to sneak in and explore this place, which dates back to the 2nd century BCE. But what you're really going to be shocked about is how they made this exquisite art. You see, these caves were made by Buddhist monks in the 2nd century BCE, but it was also finished in the 6th century CE. That's right. These caves were worked on for nearly 800 years. They used picks, chisels, and hammers to carve out these amazing sights, but they did it in near darkness. Only a small sliver of light could penetrate the openings of the cave, meaning that for most of the day it was pitch black inside. And if you've ever tried to draw or paint in the dark, you know how hard it is. And this isn't drawing or painting. This is sculpting. It's three-dimensional. To make things even more difficult, sometimes they would only have one weak oil lamp to illuminate their work area. So not only were they working in the dark, but they had very little time to work because once the sun set, their workday was done. But somehow they managed to create these incredibly detailed works of art. Take a look at this frieze above me. It's filled with elephants, horses, and other figures. And if you zoom into these sculptures, you can see how detailed they are. These figures have more detail than anything I've ever seen before. It's absolutely mind-boggling that they were able to create such detailed artwork in near darkness. Not only that, but they also created beautiful paintings. Again, nobody knows how they did it. Even today, scientists don't understand how they made these paintings. The colors are still bright and vibrant after 2,000 years, but they didn't have any electricity or advanced technology back then. So how did they do it? Well, the answer lies within these caves. As we walk through the complex, we're going to uncover the secrets of the Ajanta Caves. The first thing you need to know is that these caves weren't used to worship Buddhist gods. Instead, they were used as dwellings for Buddhist monks. But because they were staying in these caves, they wanted to make them beautiful, so they decorated them with sculptures and paintings. And as we continue walking into this cave, we're going to see some of the earliest examples of Buddhist art. Cave number 9 contains some of the oldest sculptures here, dating all the way back to the 2nd century BCE. But wait until we get to the end of the cave. Here we have a massive statue of the Buddha. It's nearly 4 meters tall, and it's incredible to think that it was carved out of solid rock by hand. The detail in this statue is just unbelievable. But we're not done yet. As we exit the cave, we're greeted by this amazing sight. Cave 10 contains another massive statue of the Buddha, but this one is almost 6 meters tall. That's the same as 2 of me stacked on top of each other. These statues must have taken hundreds of monks dozens of years to complete, so why did they put 2 giant statues at the beginning of the path? Well, it's because these caves are located in a valley, and throughout history pilgrims had to pass by these caves. So when they saw these giant statues of the Buddha, they knew they had arrived at the sacred site. So now we've seen the oldest caves, but what about the newest ones? Well, those are located at the far end of the complex. We have to walk past dozens of other caves to get there. And some of these caves contain some of the most breathtaking art here. This one, for example, contains a massive statue of the future Buddha, but he has a halo around his head, and his hair is made of real gold. It must have been priceless. But let's move on. I love this next cave. It's filled with all sorts of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Some of them are standing, others are sitting, and there are all sorts of interesting details in this cave. Look, for example, at the hands of this figure. He has one hand resting on his knee like this, and the other hand is holding up his robe like this. And then look at the folds in his robe. This is some of the most lifelike and realistic sculpture I've ever seen. You can tell just by looking at it that these artists spent countless hours studying human anatomy so they could make these sculptures as realistic as possible. And speaking of hands, look at this amazing relief. There are two hands emerging from the clouds, and they're holding up a canopy over the head of the Buddha. These hands are not perfect. They're wrinkled, and they have stretch marks. Again, the attention to detail is just mind-boggling. The same goes for the hair. Look at the strands of hair coming out of his ears. It's just so lifelike. You can tell by the sweat dripping down his forehead that he just came from a long journey. And he looks tired, but peaceful at the same time. The artist did an incredible job making him look so lifelike. And let's not forget the background. The mountains in the distance are beautifully painted. And there are all sorts of interesting details in the trees and plants in the foreground. But remember, this was made nearly 2,000 years ago. Nobody knows how they were able to make this exquisite piece of art. And this cave is no different. Here we have a bodhisattva with her hands in a particular mudra, which means that she has stopped the flow of time and is thinking deeply. And as we walk further into the cave, we come across another bodhisattva, except he's in a different mudra. His hands are positioned differently, which means he's expressing something else. These mudras are really interesting because they show different hand gestures which represent different ideas. And as we walk further into the cave, we come across another bodhisattva, but he's in a different mudra. His hands are positioned differently, which means he's expressing something else. These mudras are really interesting because they show different hand gestures, which represent different ideas. Now, we're finally at the last cave, cave number 29. And it's special for a few reasons. First of all, it's the biggest cave here, covering an area of 2,500 square feet. Secondly, it contains some of the most exquisite sculptures here, especially these two. They're standing on either side of the entrance, and they're holding lotuses in their hands. And finally, it contains the most famous sculpture here, the only reclining Buddha statue. And this statue is so popular because it shows the Buddha in a more relaxed pose. He's lying on his side and he looks so peaceful. In fact, there are people meditating in front of it, trying to achieve that inner peace that the Buddha had. But there is one last secret in this cave. If you walk all the way to the end, you'll see this red circle on the ground. And it might look like just a random mark, but it's actually a very important symbol. It's called the chakra, and it represents the energy center of the universe. According to Buddhist tradition, the earth is flat, and the center of the earth is located right here in the Ajanta caves. So if you want to meditate and reach enlightenment, all you have to do is find this red circle and close your eyes and focus on your breathing. But it's time to say goodbye to this amazing place. On our way out, we pass by some monks who are taking a break from their meditation. One of them notices me looking at him and gives me a big smile. Remember, you can't take photos or videos of the actual caves, but there are plenty of other places to explore here. We pass by a small village and a school where children are learning about Buddhism. We also visit a monastery where monks live and practice meditation. And we meet a sadhu, which is a holy man in India. He's very friendly and gives us some tips on how to improve our meditation. And finally, we arrive at the lake, which is located in the middle of the complex. It's a very serene and peaceful place to relax and reflect on our experience here. And as we leave the complex, we can't help but feel rejuvenated and inspired. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Hey, everyone, what do we have here? An enormous horse carved in chalk, frozen mid-gallop across the hillside of an English village. It's just one of those things that seems to be there forever. But it turns out this giant white horse has been around for more than 3,000 years. Welcome to the South Downs, England. This is the Uffington White Horse. And this is my channel. When you first see this giant horse standing at the top of the hill, it looks like it could have been put there any time in the last several thousand years. So, how old is it really? Let's go back to 2000 BCE when a culture known as the Beaker people were living across Britain and Europe. These people got their name because they were buried with ceramic cups and beakers, and their settlements can still be found all over the UK. But what did they look like? We have very few artistic renderings of them, but the ones we do have show a culture that looks almost alien to us with huge white eyes hairless heads, and skinny little bodies. The most famous example is this guy on the Amesbury Archer bronze. But with these wide-eyed figures come depictions of animals too, which would later evolve into the wonderful Celtic art style we know today. But back then, they looked like this. But why are these animals so prominent? Today, there are more than 100 sites across Britain and Ireland where archaeologists have found examples of animals carved into rocks or drawn into caves. Some are just single images, while others are entire zoological gardens. Take a look at this one, for example, from Bryn Celli Park in Wales. There are dozens of these rock art sites across Britain, some showing cows, some showing horses, and others showing other animals like deer and goats. In Ireland alone, there are hundreds of Bronze Age rock etchings. Most show cattle, but some show horses. All of these carvings date back to the same time period, the Beaker people, 3,000 years before Christ. But here's the thing, these are only a small percentage of the total number of sites. There are dozens, if not hundreds more, that predate the Bronze Age and show similar themes. This is the Cerne Abbas giant, and yes, it does look a bit phallic. Back in the Neolithic era, 4000 BCE, humans started to settle down in this area of England, and they brought their religious iconography with them. They had been traveling for generations, and wherever they went, they left behind drawings of the animals they hunted. When they settled down, they continued to draw those same animals on the stones and hillsides near their homes. Now, I've mentioned the term megalithic before, and you probably know about Stonehenge, right? Well, it's not the only megalithic site in the area. Avebury is nearby, and it's actually bigger than Stonehenge. It's just not as well known. Here is Stonehenge. Now here is Avebury. But what's fascinating is this circle of stones isn't the only large monument built by the people who lived here. Just across the road from Avebury is Silbury Hill. And no, it's not a burial mound. Despite what archaeologists once thought, there are no human remains inside. It's not a burial mound. Instead, it's a massive artificial hill that was built during the Neolithic and then used for centuries afterward. It's the largest man-made mound in all of Europe, and it towers 137 feet above the surrounding landscape. And it turns out the people who built it knew exactly what they were doing. A team of scientists used ground-penetrating radar to scan Silbury Hill. Buried deep underneath the mound are two human-shaped voids. They also discovered patterns of post holes, suggesting there was once a structure there that may have been used as a ceremonial building. Whatever they were doing inside this big hill, the builders must have done it for a long time. The hill was used for nearly 2,000 years. But after the Neolithic era, something changed. After 3,000 years of humans carving horses into rocks, drawing them on cave walls and burying them under burial mounds, the Iron Age arrived. This was a new time period in Europe when, you guessed it, people started working with iron. This happened independently in several places around the world, including China and Mesoamerica. But let's focus on Europe. The Iron Age began around 800 BCE, which is when the Celts started to emerge. Unlike the Beaker people, the Celts left behind a wealth of artwork, much of which shows horses. Here's a Gorgon from the Isle of Man. Here's another one from Ireland. And here's a fantastic example from Brittany. But what do these three examples have in common? They all have horses on them. In fact, if you take a look at any Celtic work, whether it's a piece of jewelry, a sculpture, or a vase, chances are you will find horses. Horses were everything to the Celts. They used them for transportation, war, and food. Their lives revolved around horses. And that's why I think the Celts might have built some of the most spectacular monuments ever made. As you may already know, the word Celtic refers to many different tribes and cultures, and it wasn't just one homogeneous group of people. The Celts came from many regions, and they didn't even have one language. The word Celtic was assigned to them by outsiders. That's why it makes sense that there are so many different types of Celtic art styles. They didn't all live in the same place or even speak the same language. They were very diverse, but they shared a love for horses. And here's where I believe the Celts drew inspiration for some of their most amazing works. Take a look at this map showing the location of every Celtic tribe and settlement. Then look at this map showing the location of every horse carving from the Bronze Age. Finally, take a look at this modern map of England. Do you see anything? Yes, that's right. Most of the ancient horse carvings are located right in the middle of England, which was the center of Celtic culture. If you look closely at the map of the Celtic tribes, you can see the overlap. For centuries, the people living in this region drew horses on rocks and carved them into hillsides. And that tradition never ended. It just evolved. I believe the Celts were directly influenced by the earlier tradition of carving horses into hillsides and rocks. Instead of making small figurines, they made enormous sculptures. They crafted intricate jewelry with horses on them. They even built giant chariots for war. Here's an example. Here's another one. And here's one more. What's interesting is that most of these objects were created between 500 BCE and 50 CE, and they all show the same influence from earlier cultures. This goes for the larger monuments, too. Look at this stone circle, for example, near the village of Rollright. And now look at this other stone circle near the village of Avebury. You see how one inspired the other. This is called cultural diffusion, and it happens when ideas and traditions spread from one group of people to another. Cultural diffusion is responsible for many of the great works of history, and it's impossible to say where one culture ends and another begins. So, back to our story. It seems likely that the tradition of carving horses into hillsides dates back at least 6,000 years. The Beaker people weren't the first to do it. Someone showed them how, and they weren't the last either. The tradition lasted until the Iron Age and beyond. If you look closely at the Uffington White Horse, you can see the imprint of centuries of repairs and restoration. Thousands of years ago, people would have stood at the top of this hill and chipped away at the chalk, scraping off the loose dirt and revealing the white earth below. It's hard to say exactly how they did it, but eventually the earth became so compacted that they may have used simple tools to chip away at the surface. Every few hundred years, the image needed touch-ups to prevent erosion. Sometimes it would take weeks to restore the figure. During World War II, the horse was filled with concrete to help preserve it, and it's thanks to all these repairs that the Uffington White Horse is still around today. It's worth mentioning that nobody knows for sure what the horse is supposed to represent. Some historians suggest it's a symbol of the sun. Others suggest it's a sacred animal from a distant land. Maybe it's a reminder of the people who carved it and those who will see it in the future. Or maybe it's just there to run forever across the skin of the land. That's all I have for you today. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Hey, guys, have you ever seen these types of stones? How did they move such huge stones with such precision? Who moved them? And how did they do it? These are just some of the questions that I'll try to answer in this video. The temple is dedicated to the supreme god of the ancient Romans, Jupiter. The ruins of this temple, which can be found in the Lebanese city of Baalbek today, represent the largest undertaking in masonry that has ever been done by human hands. It is entirely made of white limestone and was built over the course of several centuries, from 64 to 107 AD. During its construction, over 1 million stone blocks were used, and about 30,000 of them still stand today. This temple, like all other Roman temples, had a square shape. Its sides were approximately 100 meters long, making the building a true giant, measuring 300 meters on each side. In addition, its main columns reached a height of 25 meters, so we're talking about an absolutely gigantic structure that would have towered over everything around it. But that's not where it stops. In fact, it gets even more interesting. The entire weight of the building rested on 6 enormous pillars. Each of these pillars had a square shape and had sides of 8 meters. What makes these pillars so special is their weight. Each one of them weighs approximately 700 tons, which is equal to the weight of 14 African elephants. That's why the construction of this temple was considered a miracle back then. But even elephants can't explain how these stones were moved. But first things first, where did they actually get these massive stones from? To answer this question, we need to go 3 kilometers south of Baalbek to a place called Hekel. There is an old quarry there where the extraction of limestone began in the time of the Phoenicians. This continued during the rule of the Ptolemaic dynasty and finally came to an end under the rule of the Roman Empire. Limestone blocks could have been transported from the quarry to the coast via an artificial canal. The harbor town of Taifa, located near modern-day Tripoli, was probably the main import point for the materials needed to build the temple. From there, the materials were most likely transported by boat to Baalbek. We know that 2 types of boats were mainly used in those days: round boats made of wood and flat boats made of stone. The round boats had a radius of about 6 meters, a length of about 14 meters, and could reach speeds of up to 8 kilometers per hour. They were mostly used for shorter distances. For longer distances, larger ships were required. These ships could reach lengths of up to 30 meters and could carry up to 300 soldiers or 60 elephants. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly what kind of ships were used to transport these stones. However, judging by the size of the harbors, most likely large ships were used. In addition to boats, land transport also played a crucial role. Most likely elephants were used here since they were the main means of transportation of heavy loads in those days. However, we can't say for sure that only elephants were used because horses also played a very important role in the construction of the temple. We know this because a Roman coin was found on the territory of Baalbek depicting the god Mercury holding a caduceus in his right hand and driving a 4-horse chariot. So we figured out how the blocks could have been delivered to the coast and then transported to the construction site. But now we need to figure out how they actually lifted these 700-ton stones and placed them in their designated locations. There are several theories about this. The first assumes that they used levers. In fact, this is confirmed by Roman architectural drawings on the walls of the temple itself. Levers were used both for lifting and for moving stones. According to this theory, 2 inclined planes were installed under the stone, and then a lever was placed under the first plane. As a result, the stone began to rise. After that, the lever was moved, and the stone slid along the second inclined plane. Of course, this required tremendous effort, especially since the stone needed to be raised to a height of 3 meters. However, based on the accuracy with which the blocks were placed, it seems unlikely that this method was used. The fact is that when using a lever, it's almost impossible to achieve such accuracy. The next theory suggests that the stones were lifted using a crane. Cranes were widely used in ancient times. In particular, we know about the use of cranes in the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza. In addition, the Egyptians left behind many drawings depicting various types of cranes. It's easy to imagine how these cranes could have been used to lift stones. The Egyptians used ramps to raise the stones to the desired height. A ramp was a flat road that led to the top of the building and gradually increased in height. It's easy to assume that the Egyptians could have used the same method, but for some reason we don't find any evidence of this in the archaeological record. What else could the builders have used to lift the blocks? They could have simply pushed them. This theory may sound completely absurd, but if we look at it carefully, it becomes clear that it's quite possible. Let's take a closer look at the drawing. You can see how the stone is raised using a lever. At first glance, it seems that 2 people are doing all the work. However, that's not the case. If we look closely, we can see that there are actually 4 people in the picture. 2 of them hold the lever, and the other 2 seem to be pushing the stone. This indicates that in order to lift the blocks, it took the effort of 8 strong men. Thus, theoretically, it was possible to lift stones without the use of machines. But how could they move these stones with such precision? Even if 8 people managed to push the stone into place, it's hard to imagine how they could place it so accurately. It turns out that the only way to place the stone so accurately is to use guides. Guides would allow not only to move the stones horizontally, but also vertically. That is, they could make sure that the stone ended up exactly where it needed to be. This theory is supported by a series of grooves found in the temple. These grooves were probably used to move the stones. But who could have come up with such a plan? Baalbek was of great importance to the Romans because, according to legend, it was here that the god Jupiter himself descended to earth. Over time, the temple became one of the most important religious centers of the empire. Initially, the Emperor Hadrian visited it, then the Emperor Antoninus, Pius Marcus Aurelius, and finally the Emperor Septimius Severus. The last three emperors restored the temple, making it even more magnificent than before. But this splendor didn't last too long. In 393 A.D., the Roman Emperor Theodosius I closed the Temple of Jupiter and made it a church. In 635, the Caliph Omar conquered Lebanon and destroyed the temple. Only a few ruins remained, and today we can only guess how magnificent it once was. Many historians suggest that the builders of Baalbek were the Phoenicians. But who were the Phoenicians? The Phoenicians were a group of related peoples that inhabited a vast region along the Mediterranean coast, from the eastern shores of the Mediterranean to the British Isles. They were excellent sailors and traders, which allowed them to establish extensive trade networks throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. The Phoenician civilization reached its peak between the 16th and 11th centuries BC. During this time, they founded many colonies and trading posts, including Carthage in present-day Tunisia, which later grew into a major metropolis. The Phoenicians were also known for their craftsmanship and artistry. They were skilled metalworkers producing exquisite jewelry and weapons. Their purple dye, extracted from a type of sea snail, was highly prized throughout the ancient world. The Phoenicians had a significant impact on the development of writing, creating one of the earliest alphabets, which greatly influenced the development of writing systems in neighboring cultures. One of the most famous contributions of the Phoenicians was the creation of the Phoenician alphabet, which served as the basis for the Greek and later the Roman alphabet. This innovation facilitated communication, trade, and cultural exchange throughout the Mediterranean region. So the Phoenicians were definitely a very smart and advanced civilization. It's entirely possible that they were the ones who built the temple. But that's just my assumption. If you have your own version of who could have built the temple, write about it in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked it, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. See you soon. Bye. Ancient clay tablets that were discovered in 2007 have left experts scratching their heads for more than a decade. They have no idea what they mean. The tablets are called the Tartaria tablets, and they're covered with indecipherable symbols. They could be the world's oldest writing. They may prove that literacy developed independently multiple times around the world before all known civilizations. Or they could be nothing more than a series of meaningless marks made by a prehistoric flint knapper. But first, let's take a look at these strange artifacts themselves. The Tartaria tablets are 6 small pieces of clay found by archaeologists in northern Iraq in the foothills of the Zagros Mountains. It was an ancient settlement here that gave the tablets their name, Tel al-Ubaid. The artifacts were discovered during excavations of this site between 1953 and 1954, then again from 1960 to 1961, but they weren't properly analyzed until 2007. These tablets date back to somewhere between 6800 and 6000 BC. That is 800 years before the invention of the wheel and 1,000 years before the emergence of agriculture in the region. At the time of their discovery, the tablets were thought to be about 5,000 years old. However, subsequent radiocarbon dating has pushed that back to closer to 8,000 years ago. What's so interesting about these tablets is that they bear marks that look suspiciously like the world's earliest writing system. Each tablet has been covered with hundreds of tiny stamped impressions. The symbols are roughly 2 centimeters in diameter and look remarkably similar to one another. Some appear to have straight lines, while others have zigzag or wavy lines, along with a number of dots. A couple of the tablets also seem to feature small humanoid figures. It's these markings that have led some researchers to suggest that the tablets contain a sophisticated communication system. but it's also what's made them so difficult to decipher. The 6 tablets were likely originally part of a larger collection, and had they been discovered intact, it's possible we would have already figured out what they mean. Unfortunately, however, they were found broken into thousands of fragments, though only 300 of those were actually legible. Some of the tablets had been deliberately smashed, and archaeologists found them inside a structure that appears to have been used for storage. This suggests that whoever created the tablets destroyed them intentionally, perhaps because they realized someone had found them, or they were trying to hide their existence. We don't know. What's more, none of the symbols appeared to match any language we know today. Even if the markings do turn out to be a form of writing, there's a chance they were written in a long-lost language that died out with the civilization that created it. So, who created the tablets? There are 2 prevailing theories among experts. The first is that the tablets were made by a group of nomadic hunter-gatherers. Their markings might have been a sophisticated system used to communicate ideas about topics such as local plants, animals, and weather patterns. Proponents of this theory argue that a sophisticated communication system could have developed among hunter-gatherer groups without the need for an advanced society. For example, some have suggested that cave paintings indicate a complex system of communication existed in pre-literate societies. The other theory is that the tablets represent a previously unknown early civilization. Their creators could have been settled agriculturalists who lived in cities and maintained a high level of social organization. This would have allowed them to develop a sophisticated writing system, complete with its own alphabet of symbols. Right now, archaeologists are leaning toward the second explanation. The fact that the tablets were found at a well-developed archaeological site lends credence to this theory. Tel al-Ubaid shows evidence of being occupied by humans as far back as 7200 BC. This makes it one of the earliest known settlements in human history. Whatever the case, it seems clear that someone made these tablets intentionally. They weren't just created by stamping random objects into a soft clay surface. This was a deliberate act intended to record something important. But what does this mean? Does it change our understanding of human history? Let's talk about the possibility that these tablets are indeed the world's first writing. Writing is traditionally defined as a communication system in which symbols represent semantic units of meaning. In other words, each symbol conveys some kind of message. If the Tartaria tablets do turn out to be the world's oldest writing, it would upend everything we know about human history. For most of the last century, experts believed that writing arose independently only once. Sometime around 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, humans began using cuneiform script to record their history and ideas on clay tablets like the ones we find today. From here, writing spread throughout the Near East and eventually the rest of the world. However, we now have reason to question this assumption. If the Tartarian tablets really do depict a writing system, it means that literacy developed twice in nearly the same time frame, but in completely different parts of the world. The world's first writing may have arisen simultaneously in Mesopotamia and somewhere in the Zagros Mountains. This also brings us one step closer to answering the question of whether or not writing is an inevitable byproduct of human development. After all, both of these instances of early writing arose independently in societies that were developing along completely different trajectories. Both cultures were settled, but neither had progressed to the point of building cities. So it seems literacy can develop anywhere. All it takes is an inventive people with a desire to record their thoughts. But what if the Tartaria tablets aren't a writing system? If that's the case, it would mean that the symbols are nothing more than decorative or artistic elements. Someone simply enjoyed making these patterns and pressed them into the clay for no deeper purpose. There's even a chance they have nothing to do with literacy at all. Some researchers have suggested the symbols were pressed into the clay by a flint knapper to keep their hands busy while working. After all, creating arrowheads and other tools from flint is a painstaking process, and it can take a long time to make even a single piece. So it's plausible the knapper would want to do something else to pass the time. That said, The fact that the tablets were found smashed inside a structure used for storage doesn't really jive with this theory. It seems unlikely a flint knapper would go to such lengths to conceal their handiwork. In the end, we simply don't know what the Tartaria tablets mean. Researchers have put forward numerous theories, but without any new discoveries, we'll probably never know for sure, until we figure out whether or not the Tartaria tablets contain a writing system. We won't know whether or not literacy developed independently multiple times in prehistoric times. But one thing is for certain, these tablets continue to baffle experts more than a decade after their discovery. What do you think? Do you think the Tartaria tablets are evidence that writing developed multiple times in prehistory? Or are they simply a series of meaningless symbols created by a flint knapper? Let us know your theories in the comments below. And remember to subscribe if you haven't already. We've got lots of fascinating videos coming up, and thanks to our supporters for helping us make all this happen. It seems that there's no end to the mysteries that have been buried away and forgotten about throughout history. There are many places around the world that humans just can't seem to stop uncovering artifacts from long-lost civilizations, or even creatures that may be extinct but are still thriving in their graves. One of these places is the various caves located all over the globe. Today, we're going to be taking a trip down under to see how this Mount Owen claw was discovered, what it could mean, and why some people think that maybe the animal that it belonged to isn't really extinct after all. But first, I need you to do me a favor and leave a thumbs up to stay up to date with all our awesome videos. And then, while you're at it, subscribe too, because we release new videos every single day. All right, let's go back down under. New Zealand has had its fair share of amazing discoveries over the years, from ancient rock carvings to hidden caves. The country seems to be filled with things that have either been hidden on purpose or simply been missed for so long that they might as well have been invisible. This is especially true when it comes to the country's many caves. These have not only been home to prehistoric people at one point, but also a sort of gateway to another world where anything goes and the laws of nature do not really apply. It makes sense that some would consider these areas to be sacred. One of the most recent incredible finds took place in 2017. Archaeologists were already excavating the area known as the Mount Owen Cave, which is located on the South Island in the middle of the country. Here they uncovered a number of things, one of them being a moa egg, which was pretty exciting on its own because these birds went extinct hundreds of years ago. They were large flightless birds that evolved from ancestors that flew over from Polynesia and then chose violence against the small mammals that were living in New Zealand. There were 3 species of moa during the Pleistocene epoch, and each was taller than a human and weighed more than an ox. Unfortunately for them, the humans who eventually made it to New Zealand brought dogs with them, and those big dogs didn't exactly play nice with the moa. They were hunted to extinction by humans and their canine companions. But that's beside the point. Finding an egg from a creature that should be extinct was exciting enough, but then they found something else. Someone had apparently found a claw from the same bird and brought it with them when they left. This was exciting, because now they had a bit of physical evidence that could help them answer some questions about the moa, particularly because fossils are rare in New Zealand. In fact, this was the first time a complete skeleton of a moa had ever been found. Finding the claw was great, but there was just one problem. Nobody knew where the rest of the bird was. Researchers estimate that the bird itself died around 140 years ago, but the claw probably came from a much more recent trespasser. Just how recently was a little hard to tell. Researchers used a number of methods to try and determine the age of the claw, but they weren't able to get a solid answer. Some experts believe that it was anywhere from 800 to 1,000 years old, while others say that it could be anywhere from 130 to 140 years old. There are a few reasons for this, but the main one is that the claw wasn't a part of the original skeleton. Someone had found it, taken it, and then abandoned it in the cave before the researchers arrived. This means that there could be bones in the cave that they haven't found yet, but it also means that the claw could have been put there very recently. And since nobody knows how long the claw had been sitting in the cave, It's difficult to know how long it had actually been since the bird had died. But here's the thing. Even though the claw might not have been there for long, it was found in perfect condition. It looked like it had come from a much more recent bird because it still had feathers attached to it. Most of the time when archaeologists find a claw or a bone, it's missing flesh. It's weathered, and it's impossible to tell much about it. But this one looked like it had just fallen off the bird yesterday. So while it could have been put there within the last 100 years, it could have also been put there 1,000 years ago. Nobody really knows. But then someone thought of a solution. If they couldn't date the claw itself, then why not date the dirt that it had been hiding in? They dated the dirt that was caked on the claw and got a result that was shocking. According to radiocarbon dating, the dirt on the claw is between 640 and 710 years old. This means that the bird probably died sometime before 1290 AD, somewhere between 130 and 140 years before Europeans showed up on the island. We know that the Emoa went extinct before 1400, but we don't know exactly when. So this was a pretty cool discovery. And while it doesn't prove that the Emoa survived into modern times, it doesn't disprove it either. For the most part, scientists are happy with the answer that the claw belonged to a moa that died sometime before 1290 AD. But some people are convinced that there's more to the story. For starters, nobody knows how long the claw was sitting in the cave. It could have been there for 1,000 years, or it could have been put there yesterday. And since nobody knows the difference, some are taking that to mean that the claw could have come from a more recent bird. That means that the bird could have died as recently as the 1800s, or maybe even earlier. There are even claims that moa have been spotted in New Zealand as recently as the 1900s, although nobody has ever been able to confirm these sightings. That doesn't mean that they're not true, however. After all, we can't prove that the Emoa went extinct in the 1200s either. All we know is that there were no bones or remains found after that point. So it's possible that there could still be some moa roaming around out there. And if that's the case, it would make sense that someone could have stumbled across a claw or two. So far, scientists have stuck with the theory that the bird died in the 1200s, but some people still think that it could have died in the 1800s. And until scientists are able to uncover more remains, this debate will continue. After all, there are people who claim to have seen live moa, so it wouldn't be surprising if some of them were right. Now, obviously, this is a pretty crazy topic, and it's definitely not for everyone. But I want to ask you guys a question. What do you think? Do you think that the MOA went extinct in the 1200s, or do you think that it died more recently? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and while you're down there, remember to leave a like and subscribe so you do not miss out on any of our awesome videos. All right. I think it's time to move on to Ancient Mystery number 97. This has been Ancient Mysteries, and I am your host. Join me next time as we continue to uncover the secrets of our past. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you next time. Hi, it's me. Number 47 is the worst number to be assigned to anything. Just ask any of the thousands of people who watched my last video. But here we are today at the Knockin' Stone, and there is no getting away from it. This is number 47. It's a giant slab of stone standing over 3 meters tall and nearly 2 meters wide that sits near the village of Aberfoyle in the heart of Scotland. It's covered with spirals, hundreds of them, which are somehow both mesmerizing and completely alien to our modern minds. We have no idea what they mean or why they were carved here all those years ago. All we know is that they were left behind by people we would now call Picts, a collection of tribes that lived across northern Scotland between about the 2nd century AD and the 8th century AD. They got their name from the Romans who had no idea who these people actually were, so just called them Picti, meaning painted people, probably in reference to the blue tattoos that they wore. And while we may not know much about the Picts, one thing is for sure, they liked to carve spirals. Not only is this the largest collection of spirals anywhere left behind by the Picts, but spiral motifs appear on dozens of other Pictish stones, as well as on various pieces of artwork found across Britain. But if spiral patterns were so common back then, Why do we still have no idea what they mean? Well, it's because we have absolutely no surviving writing from the Picts, which has made it nearly impossible to piece together any kind of coherent narrative from the artifacts that we have found. Most archaeologists agree that each spiral represents a clan, a family, or even a person. But beyond that, we're left to speculate. The Victorians came up with some particularly spicy ideas, seeing the spiral shapes as a kind of shorthand for Christianity, for the male and female reproductive organs, and for other things that were a little too naughty for Victorian drawing rooms. More recently, archaeologists have suggested that the spirals represent a kind of map, a celestial map showing where the constellations were when they were first observed. And that's the idea that I want to explore in this episode of Mysteries of the Ancient World. The Knockin stone was first studied by Sir James Fraser, an anthropologist who published The Golden Bough in 2 volumes in 1890. While studying the stone, Fraser counted 388 spirals, although others have since counted up to 500. He also noticed that many of the spirals were aligned with certain points of the compass, which inspired him to propose a theory that these stones were used as gnomons, giant sundials that were used to track the passage of time. But he went a step further, suggesting that the spirals were actually used to tell the time of year and that each spiral represented a particular day. In his book, he writes, "If we suppose that the inner circle of the concho stone marked the days of the year, and this is by no means an arbitrary supposition, but rests upon good evidence, then the precession of the months might be traced round the stone beginning at the vernal equinox and following the order of the zodiac." Unfortunately for Fraser's theory, archaeologists have since discovered much better preserved examples of ancient sundials, including one in Yorkshire that dates back 3,500 years and has markings for every hour of every day throughout the year. None of these ancient sundials look anything like the Knockin stone. So, while Fraser's theory is an interesting interpretation, it's ultimately nothing more than that. Instead, it's far more likely that the spirals were used to mark important locations or perhaps clan territories. For example, a similar stone called the Clava cairn contains several spirals, as well as a series of straight lines and dots, which archaeologists believe marks out a nearby river valley, perhaps indicating a boundary. Another example is the Newton stone, which has 25 spirals set into its surface. Archaeologists believe that each spiral represents one of the 25 families in the region who paid tribute to the chief of the Pictish clan that ruled over them. There are also several Pictish stones that contain spirals inside of cups, perhaps indicating that the cup itself represents a clan or a family, with the spiral acting as a decorative flourish. But while it's very likely that each spiral represents something different, we can't know for sure, which means we can't possibly know what they would have looked like in the sky. Enter Dr. Angus Conkle, a retired lecturer from Edinburgh University who proposed that the spirals represent the positions of stars and constellations in the sky. Conk took a close look at the spiral patterns and noted that many of the spiral arms extended towards magnetic north, which is where your compass needle points. Now, you might think that a compass needle will always point to true north, the direction of the North Pole, but it turns out that's not exactly true. In fact, the Earth's magnetic field fluctuates and changes over time, meaning that magnetic north can move by as much as 10 degrees. According to Conkle, this is important because the average angle of the spirals relative to magnetic north is 66 degrees, which means that to have been created at least 1,000 years ago, and this would require a shift in the Earth's axis of almost 8 degrees, which wouldn't have gone unnoticed. So magnetic north must have pointed in the same direction back then as it does now. But what does that mean? Well, according to Conkle, it means that we can take the spirals at face value, believing that they do indeed show us the night sky from thousands of years ago. If that's true, then they should match up pretty closely to the positions of the stars as they appeared in the sky when the stone was first erected. Conkle spent a lot of time examining the stone and comparing the angles of the spirals with the positions of the stars, and he eventually produced a map that showed where the spirals pointed, When he superimposed that map over a star map of the night sky, he found that it matched up almost perfectly with the position of the stars in the sky around 3500 BC. In other words, the spirals of the Concho stone could be an accurate record of what the night sky looked like when it was first built, nearly 5,000 years ago. Now, I should add that Conkley's theory is also an interpretation, and it's by no means universally accepted by the archaeological community. For one thing, there's no way to prove it. We can't go back 5,000 years and check the alignment of the spirals against the night sky. And there are several other explanations for why the spirals might point towards magnetic north. Furthermore, even if we accept that the spirals do represent the night sky, we have no way of knowing how the Picts would have interpreted what they saw. It's possible that they truly believed that they were looking up at the stars, or they could have been looking at something else entirely, such as the phases of the moon or even the paths of comets or shooting stars. Regardless of whether or not Conklin's interpretation is correct, it's a fascinating look at one of the most mysterious aspects of life in prehistory, the way ancient humans interacted with the universe. Most of the archaeological record consists of objects and structures that we can touch and see, but how ancient humans interpreted the world around them is completely lost to time, except for a few fleeting glimpses like the Concho stone. We'll never know for sure what the spirals at Knocking Stone mean, but whatever the answer, we can be sure that it was important enough to have been carved over and over again by the Picts and other prehistoric cultures across Britain. It's part of an ancient language, one that we've long forgotten, but which still echoes through the spirals and petroglyphs that we find all around us. Thanks for watching. It's me. See you next time. Did the entire city just vanish into thin air, or did it sink to the bottom of the ocean? Welcome back, everyone. Here today we will explore the mystery of the lost city of Halik, which was once a very real city, but which today is home only to fish. What happened to its people? Did they all get swallowed by the sea overnight, or did they manage to flee before disaster struck? What caused the destruction of this ancient city? And what does it mean for us today? Will we ever find out what happened here? Stay tuned for answers to these questions and more. But first, please hit that like button if you're ready to dive into today's video. Also, remember to subscribe so you never miss an exciting episode. Today, we are traveling to Greece, specifically to the Peloponnese Peninsula, which juts out from mainland Greece like a bent pinky finger. It is here where history tells us a small coastal city known as Helike once stood. This city was home to around 20,000 people. According to the accounts of the ancient historians, Helike was a prosperous city. The people were wealthy and famous for their hospitality. In fact, the city had such a good reputation that anyone who visited was treated like royalty. But then, suddenly, and we mean really suddenly, the city was gone without a trace. Some say it was swallowed up by the earth, others that it sank into the sea. Could this be one of those stories that sounds more like myth than reality? If not, what really happened to Halik? There are two versions of how the city disappeared. The first comes from the writings of the Greek philosopher Strabo, who described the city as being swallowed by an earthquake. He wrote, "Halik, a city of the Argives, was destroyed by an earthquake in one day and at one fell swoop. For even the memorial of the swallowed-up city, there remains nothing but the name." Now, while other cities in Greece had been destroyed by earthquakes before, most recently in 1668 BC, when a series of earthquakes leveled the great city of Athens, the Athenians had managed to rebuild their city after the shaking stopped. But that was not the case with Helike. According to Strabo, the earth swallowed the city whole and it was gone. But this account is challenged by another version of events written down by the Greek poet and playwright Pausanias, who claimed that Halik didn't get eaten by the earth, but instead by the sea. According to his account, the citizens of Halik pissed off the gods, so the gods got mad and punished them. Poseidon, god of the sea, sent a tsunami to wipe the city off the face of the earth. No warning, no time to prepare, the giant wave just showed up and crashed over the city, washing it away. So, which one of these versions, if either, is correct? To answer that question, let's look at some archaeological evidence. Archaeological evidence suggests that the city didn't simply disappear overnight. Instead, archaeologists believe that the destruction of Helik was both sudden and catastrophic. But it took place over several days rather than in a single night. So, whether it was the earth or the sea that destroyed the city, it wasn't quite as quick as the ancient writers claimed. In 1997, a joint Greek-French archaeological team discovered the remains of Helike almost 20 meters or 65 feet underwater. Because the city was submerged, many of the buildings and other structures were well preserved. To date, the team has uncovered a temple, part of a theater, an agora or marketplace, workshops, and residential areas. They also found human bones and various artifacts, including coins, weapons, and jewelry. These discoveries have helped researchers piece together a timeline of the city's destruction. After carefully examining the layers of sediment in which the artifacts were found, researchers realized that the upper layer contained objects from after the city was destroyed, while the lower layer contained objects from before. Between these two layers was a thin layer of volcanic ash from the eruption of the nearby volcano in 1640 BC. This eruption showered the surrounding area in ash, much of which ended up in the lower layer of artifacts. This means that any structures present during the eruption would have been buried under a thick layer of ash and mud, which archaeologists call debris flow deposits. Based on this discovery, researchers knew that the destruction of the city could not have occurred before 1640 BC, nor could it have been caused by the earthquake that struck Athens in that year, because if it had been, there would not have been a break in the debris flow deposits. Then, in 2001, archaeologists made another breakthrough. They discovered a large harbor basin. Because harbors are typically built at the lowest possible elevation, it is reasonable to assume that the water level at the time of the city's destruction was at the same level as the harbor floor. Using this assumption, archaeologists estimated that the land on which the city sat had sunk about 1 meter or 3.2 feet below sea level, which means that Helik was not swallowed by the earth. It was instead pushed down by a liquid, most likely water. But why? Archaeologists continued to search for answers. They studied animal bones recovered from the site and found that many of them showed signs of butchery. This led them to believe that Helik was destroyed during the Bronze Age, sometime between 3300 and 1100 BC. They also found traces of organic material such as seeds and wood, which they sent off to be dated. One sample of charcoal from a structure destroyed during the Bronze Age came back with a date of 373 BC. Based on this evidence, researchers believe that Helik was destroyed sometime after 373 BC. But what could have caused such destruction? Researchers considered a number of possibilities. The harbor basin was deep enough to have been used as an ancient shipyard, which meant that ships could have been built and repaired within its protective waters. In fact, shipyards were typically located near major cities because they were important for trade. But not all trade is created equal. It turns out that during the time of Helik's destruction, the city was engaged in something called long-distance exchange, which involved trading goods that were rare or hard to acquire. Long-distance exchange was common throughout the Mediterranean during the late Bronze Age. But in order for this type of trade to occur, a city needed to build ships capable of traveling long distances across the open sea. And we know that the people of Helik were experienced sailors because they named one of their local bays after the mythical hero Ulysses. Helik may have been one of the few cities in Greece that had ships large enough to engage in long-distance exchange. But who would want to destroy such a city? Turns out that there was a lot of tension in the region at the time. During the late Bronze Age, Greece was ruled by a group of so-called palace centers, which were large, wealthy cities that controlled the surrounding countryside. But in the mid-13th century BC, these palace centers began to collapse. The reasons for their collapse are not entirely clear, but many scholars believe that it had something to do with climate change. According to a 2013 study published in the journal Antiquity, a shift in weather patterns during the Late Bronze Age led to a series of droughts in the eastern Mediterranean. These droughts caused widespread crop failure and famine, which in turn led to social unrest. As palace centers collapsed, the people they ruled over began to fend for themselves. They abandoned farming in favor of raising livestock, and they lived according to the laws of the strongest. In other words, it was every man for himself. And it just so happens that Helike was close to a powerful Mycenaean city known as Pylos. While Helike was busy trading far away, Pylos was growing stronger. By the 13th century BC, Pylos was powerful enough to threaten Helike's way of life. So the people of Helike reached out to their neighbors for help. Together, they built ships and prepared for war. But before they could fight back against Pylos, the entire city was destroyed. What happened? Turns out that Pylos must have grown stronger than expected. Sometime after 373 BC, a team of Mycenaean warriors sailed out of Pylos harbor and attacked Helike. They burned the city and threw its people into the sea. Then they sailed back to Pylos, proud of their victory. Or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe it was Helike that grew stronger than expected and attacked Pylos. We'll never know for sure. But one thing is certain. Whatever happened, it was the end of Helike. Her people were killed or forced to flee. Her buildings were destroyed and her glory days were over. Today, we can still find the remains of Helike beneath the waves. But it's hard to imagine that there was ever a city there at all. The only evidence of her former existence is a few artifacts and the memories of her people. Still, we can learn a lot from places like Helike. By studying the rise and fall of ancient cities, we gain a better understanding of the world we live in today. We also gain a reminder that no matter how powerful or prosperous a city is, it can be destroyed in an instant. All we have to do is look to the recent past for examples. In 1980, an earthquake leveled the city of Antioch in Turkey. In 2011, a tsunami devastated the city of Sendai in Japan. And in 2016, an earthquake leveled the city of Amatrice, also in Italy. What we can learn from these tragedies is that we should never take our prosperity for granted. We should always be prepared for disaster, and we should never forget the importance of community. When a disaster strikes, it is our friends, neighbors, and family members who will help us pick up the pieces. It is their support that will help us rebuild our lives. So never take your loved ones for granted, and never forget the importance of community. Now it's time to hear from you. What do you think happened to the city of Helike? Was it destroyed by the earth or the sea? And what lessons can we learn from its destruction? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe before you go. Thanks for watching. Imagine if somebody took a ruler to the earth and drew perfectly straight lines across Bolivia's high plateau. Well, that is exactly what happened with the Sajama Lines Massive. This is one of the newest archaeological discoveries in South America. These lines are an estimated 3,700 feet wide and stretch across the landscape for about 28 miles. The question is, how did these mysterious lines get here? And even more importantly, who made them and why? We will answer those questions and more in today's video. So make sure to watch until the end so you do not miss out on any of the juicy details. And don't forget to subscribe so you can join us back here every week for more exciting content. Welcome back, everybody. You already know what time it is. It's time to explore some of the most remote places on Earth. Our first stop takes us to the country of Bolivia, which sits right in the heart of South America. Bolivia is home to the world's largest salt flats, amazing Inca ruins, abundant wildlife, and stunning natural landscapes. In fact, Bolivia is one of the most biodiverse countries on the planet. Its terrain is extremely varied, ranging from the tropical Amazon basin in the north to barren Andean plateaus in the southwest. However, in today's video, we will be focusing on the southwest region of the country. More specifically, we're going to pay a visit to the Sajama Lines Massive. This newly discovered megalithic site consists of a series of straight lines, geometric shapes, and figures that were carved directly into the hardpan surface of the arid region. What makes this discovery so incredible is not just its size or scale, but also its remoteness. The closest large city to the site is El Alto, which has a population of over 1 million people, but even so it's still over 100 kilometers away from the massive lines. As you might imagine, the area where the geoglyphs are located is incredibly isolated and difficult to access. Even getting to the nearest city involves traveling along rugged mountain roads that are nearly impassable during the rainy season. Because of this, researchers believe that the creators of these geoglyphs would have had to undertake a very long journey across the mountains and valleys just to reach this remote plateau. But why would they do that? And who were the creators of the Salar de Uyuni geoglyphs anyway? That brings us to our next point. What is hardpan? To fully understand how such a monumental task was accomplished, we need to break down the term hardpan. Hardpan is a type of geological formation created by compacted soil and clay that is found in dry regions around the world. Essentially, it's a natural material that is similar to concrete. Although it may seem solid and unmovable at first glance, hardpan can actually be sculpted with relatively simple tools. With enough manpower, this malleable material can be cut, shaped, and polished to create smooth surfaces and intricate designs. In fact, the Nazca people used similar techniques to create their famous lines and geoglyphs. So now that we understand the makeup of the Salar de Uyuni lines, let's take a closer look at the lines themselves. There are currently 3 lines that have been discovered, although researchers estimate that there could be many more considering that each line stretches for several miles. What makes these lines so remarkable is their sheer precision. Each line is between 110 and 140 feet wide and follows a uniform pattern with slight indentations spaced evenly along their length. These patterns resemble the stripes on a zebra or the rings of a tree, suggesting a deliberate and systematic approach to their construction. Additionally, the lines appear to align with significant celestial events such as solstices and equinoxes. This purposeful alignment further emphasizes the astronomical knowledge and advanced planning required to create these geoglyphs. But how did ancient travelers accomplish such a feat? Well, we don't have all the answers just yet, but researchers believe that the key to unlocking the mystery lies in understanding the tools and techniques used by the creators of the Salar de Uyuni lines. According to lead researcher Dr. Constanza Cerruti, the team is currently analyzing the wear patterns on the rocks in the area in order to determine the instruments used to carve the lines. By examining the texture of the rocks, scientists hope to identify the type of tool that was used, whether it was a simple hand tool or something more sophisticated. This analysis will shed light on the level of technology and craftsmanship employed by the ancient builders. The study of the rock's topography will also help archaeologists understand the construction techniques used to create the geoglyphs. By studying the layers of the hardpan, researchers hope to reconstruct the process by which the lines were formed, including any ramps, levers, or other structures that may have been involved. However, despite the challenges of studying such a remote and isolated site, researchers remain optimistic about their investigation. With the support of local authorities and the use of cutting-edge technology, the team is determined to uncover the secrets of the Salar de Uyuni lines. They believe that the answers lie hidden within the rocks themselves, waiting to be uncovered. And when those secrets are revealed, they will undoubtedly rewrite history books and change the way we think about ancient civilizations. In the meantime, the team has released some fascinating findings about the site. For example, the researchers have discovered that the lines were created in 2 distinct phases. The first phase dates back to around 900 AD when the northernmost line was created. The second phase occurred later between 1480 and 1490 AD when the southern line was constructed. This suggests that the creation of the line spanned several centuries and involved multiple generations of builders. Additionally, the researchers have noted that the lines appear to follow the same orientation as other megalithic sites in the region, such as Pumapunku. This suggests that there may be a connection between these sites and that they may have been built using similar techniques and astronomical alignments. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the Salar de Uyuni lines is their possible connection to the Inca Empire. The Inca were known for their advanced engineering skills and their ability to adapt to the rugged terrain of the Andes Mountains. However, their presence in this particular region of Bolivia has not been well documented. The discovery of the Salar de Uyuni lines has shed new light on the Incas' reach and influence, suggesting that they may have extended further than previously thought. Further research is needed to confirm this theory, but the Incas' sophisticated engineering skills make them a strong candidate for the creators of these remarkable geoglyphs. The Salar de Uyuni lines are truly a testament to the ingenuity and creativity of the ancient civilizations that thrived in Bolivia. Their isolation and the difficulty of accessing the site make them a remote and mysterious place. However, it is precisely this isolation that has allowed the geoglyphs to remain hidden from modern eyes for so long. Now that they have been discovered, it is up to us to protect them and preserve them for future generations. By understanding the techniques and tools used to create these lines, we can ensure that they continue to stand as a symbol of human achievement for centuries to come. So, what do you think about the Sahama Lines Massive? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. We hope you enjoyed learning about this fascinating archaeological discovery with us. If you did, please don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on our future videos. We would also like to extend a special thanks to our supporters who have helped us in our mission to bring these incredible stories to a wider audience. Your generosity and passion for knowledge truly inspire us. Keep an eye out for more exciting updates and join us on our journey of discovery. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. If you've ever been curious about unexplained historical maps that seem to show parts of the world that we know shouldn't have been known at the time they were made, then this one is for you. The mysterious Piri Reis map was published in Istanbul in 1513 by a Turkish admiral and cartographer. The map itself is notable because it appears to depict the continent of Antarctica almost 100 years before it was officially discovered and named by modern standards. What makes this even stranger is that it also seems to show parts of the South American coast which had not yet been charted or even seen by Europeans until much later. How could a map from 1513 contain these details? Did the ancient people who made it travel to Antarctica? If so, why did they never tell anyone? While some of the more fantastical claims surrounding the Piri Reis map are likely untrue, historians agree that it's an intriguing artifact that raises many questions about what knowledge may have been lost over the centuries. There's no doubt that this map is real, but whether it really does show Antarctica as well as parts of South America that had not yet been discovered by Europeans when it was made is still debated among scholars today. In this video, we'll take a closer look at the Piri Reis map and explore some of the theories as to how it could possibly depict a continent that wasn't officially known until much later. So, what exactly is the Piri Reis map, and why should you care? To answer this question, let's start with a bit of context. As mentioned earlier, the map was published in Istanbul in 1513 by a Turkish admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis, hence its name. At the time it was made, Antarctica was not yet known to Europeans, though there had been some speculation that there might be a large landmass in the southern hemisphere. This was partly based on the fact that the known parts of the world didn't quite add up in terms of geography. For example, if you took the known African continent and added it to the known Asian continent, the result would be a world map that was out of balance. This led some scholars to hypothesize that there must be a large, undiscovered landmass somewhere in the south to make up for the gap. However, this was just a theory, and there was no actual evidence to support it. Piri Reis's map is strange because it seems to show Antarctica, which was not officially discovered until much later, and parts of the South American coast that had not yet been charted or even seen by Europeans at the time. This has led to speculation that the mapmakers had access to information or technology that we are not aware of. Some believe that they may have traveled to Antarctica themselves, while others believe that they may have had access to maps or other records that showed the continent. However, there is no concrete evidence to support either of these theories. One possible explanation is that the map makers simply made a mistake. Maps from this time period were often inaccurate, and it's possible that they simply drew Antarctica in the wrong place. Another possibility is that they were copying from an older map that was itself based on more accurate information. However, this does not explain how such a detailed map of Antarctica could have been created centuries before it was officially discovered. There are a number of strange features on the map that make it difficult to date. For example, it does not include any of the newly discovered lands in the Americas, such as those explored by Christopher Columbus and Amerigo Vespucci. Yet it does show parts of South America that were not officially charted until much later. This suggests that the map was made before 1502, as otherwise it would have had to have been created after these discoveries. However, there are other features on the map that suggest it was made much later, such as the inclusion of Africa. These contradictions have led some to believe that the map may have been created using information from travelers who visited Antarctica, as otherwise it's difficult to explain how such a detailed map of the continent could have been made before it was officially discovered. However, there is no evidence that any Europeans traveled to Antarctica before the 1700s. It's possible that the map makers were using information from sailors who traveled along the South American coast, but it's unclear how they could have gotten a map of Antarctica from this. One possibility is that they obtained the information from Arab sailors who had traveled to the southern hemisphere. There are records of Arab sailors exploring the African coast as early as the 8th century, and it's possible that they may have continued their voyages further south. However, there is no evidence that they ever reached Antarctica itself. Another possibility is that the mapmakers were using information from Portuguese explorers who were sailing around Africa in search of a sea route to Asia. However, the earliest known Portuguese map of Africa does not include any details of Antarctica. Therefore, this theory is also unlikely. It's also worth noting that Piri Reis himself claimed to have compiled the map from other sources and did not claim to have sailed to Antarctica or any of the other places depicted on the map. He stated that he used 20 different maps and charts in order to create his own, but unfortunately, none of these original sources appear to have survived. One of the most popular theories as to how the Piri Reis map could have been made is that the mapmakers had access to a lost civilization that possessed advanced knowledge of the world. Proponents of this theory believe that there was a highly advanced culture that existed in the ancient world that had knowledge of Antarctica and other parts of the world that were not known to other civilizations at the time. They believe that this knowledge was lost when the civilization was destroyed, but that some of it survived in obscure texts and artifacts such as the Piri Reis map. However, there is no evidence to support the existence of such a civilization, nor is there any evidence that any ancient culture had knowledge of Antarctica. This theory is largely based on speculation and conjecture, and it is not supported by mainstream scholars. Some believe that the map is evidence of a global flood that wiped out much of human knowledge. This theory is based on the belief that there was a great flood in the distant past that killed off most of the world's population and destroyed much of human knowledge. Proponents of this theory believe that the Piri Reis map shows Antarctica because it was made before the flood, when humans had more advanced knowledge of the world. Again, there is no evidence to support this theory, and it is not accepted by mainstream scholars. Another interesting aspect of the map is the text written on it. The map includes descriptions of various places and landmarks in different languages, including Arabic, Latin, and Greek. Some of the descriptions are in a mysterious language that has not been deciphered, but it is believed to be the language of the lost civilization. Again, there is no evidence to support this theory, and it is not accepted by mainstream scholars. What do you think? Is the Piri Reis map a genuine artifact that shows Antarctica and other parts of the world that were unknown to Europeans when it was made? Or is it a fake? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends and family. You can also subscribe to our channel to stay up to date on all of our latest videos. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time. It's 2023, and we're at the Cleva Cairns, which is a group of ancient burial sites here in Scotland. And it's winter solstice morning. The sun is just coming up over there behind me, and it's aligned with this cairn right here. Now, if we look at the other cairns, they are also aligned with the other 2 points of the solstices. So we have 1, 2, 3 cairns aligned with the solstices. But why? What was the purpose of that? That's what we're going to explore today. So this is the largest of the Cleva Cairns, a Neolithic burial mound dating back some 4,000 years. This one was constructed around 3,280 BC, and as we can see, it is a massive structure made up of around 11,000 stones, big and small. Now, during the construction of the A96 road in the 19th century, they found a human skeleton here inside this cairn. They also found animal bones and pottery. The skeleton was lying in an extended position and was buried alongside 2 women and a dog. The pottery would suggest that the individual buried here was likely quite high status. In total, there are 18 cairns at Cleva, and they date from as early as 3300 BC to as late as 1500 BC, meaning they were used for burials across a period of around 1800 years. The majority of them have been robbed out, so that means that people came back to these cairns and removed the bodies of their dead in later centuries. These are not the only cairns that are aligned with the solstices. There are many others across Britain and Ireland, and they show us that our ancestors had an incredible knowledge of astronomy. If we go back to the main cairn now, because there are 3 separate chambers within this cairn. If we focus in on the front left chamber, then we can see that the roof has fallen in, and the entrance is almost perfectly aligned with the winter solstice sunrise. As I mentioned earlier, the Cleva Cairns were used across a period of around 1800 years, and during that time the solstices moved slightly in the sky due to a phenomenon known as precession of the equinoxes. Now, don't worry about what causes that or how it works. All you need to know is that the effect is that over thousands of years, the solstices move backwards relative to the constellations, and that means that the star signs change. So when our ancestors built these tombs, the winter solstice would have been marked by the constellation Orion, but now it's the constellation of Taurus. So what we can see here is that the solstices were very important to our ancestors. And not only do we have 3 cairns aligned with the solstices, but we also have this monument here which is aligned with the summer solstice. So the question is, why were the solstices so important to them? Well, the answer is probably not what you expect. You see, we tend to think of the solstices as being all about light and dark, summer and winter, the longest day of the year and the shortest day of the year. And while that's true, the solstices mean much more than that. You see, the solstices mark the point in the year where the seasons change. So in winter we celebrate Yule, which marks the rebirth of the sun. And in summer we celebrate Litha, which marks the death of the sun. The solstices were essentially seen as times of death and rebirth. And that's why at Stonehenge the sun sets between the heel stone and the altar stone on the summer solstice. It's to symbolize the death of the sun. But then, 9 months later, on the winter solstice, the sun rises over the altar stone, which symbolizes the rebirth of the sun. This symbolism of death and rebirth is reflected in many of the myths associated with the solstices. For example, in Welsh mythology, we have the story of Gwyn ap Nudd and his army of the Wild Hunt, who hunt relentlessly across the land, chasing souls into the next world. In Gaelic mythology, we have the story of the Salmon of Knowledge, which was caught by Fionn mac Cumhaill, which granted him knowledge of every tree and herb in Ireland, knowledge that would help him survive in the wild. And in Norse mythology, we have the story of Yggdrasil, the world tree, which was struck by a dragon, causing it to shake the whole cosmos. These myths reflect the chaos and upheaval that accompanies the solstices, a time of great cosmic change, and that's why our ancestors would have celebrated these days with great feasts and bonfires, inviting the spirits of the dead to join them. At the solstices, the veil between the worlds is thinnest, allowing the spirits of the dead to pass through more easily. That's why, at Rollright Tower in England, they had a custom of leaving gifts of food and drink on the top of the tower for the spirits of the dead. And at Machen in Wales, they had a custom of throwing stones up a hill on the summer solstice, saying, "Go on, go on, go on, go on," to encourage the spirits of the dead to return home. So what we can see is that the solstices were a time for the living and the dead, to come together, a time for celebrating life and death, a time for giving thanks for the bounty of the earth and for asking for protection for the coming year. This brings us back to the Clava cairns. Why were these tombs built to align with the solstices? Well, it's likely that they were used as places of pilgrimage, that people would travel from all over to visit these tombs and leave offerings for the dead. Or perhaps they were used as places of execution, that people would be brought here to be sacrificed to the gods. Some researchers even speculate that they may have been used as places of healing, that people would come here to bathe in the sacred springs and be cured of their ailments. Unfortunately, there are no written records of any of these beliefs and practices, so we can only speculate. What we do know is that our ancestors had a deep connection to the land and the cycles of nature, and that they saw the solstices as times of great spiritual significance. Perhaps the most important thing that we can learn from these ancient sites is to remember that we are part of the natural world and that we should respect and care for the land and all living things. These ancient sites are a reminder that we are all connected and that we should strive to live in harmony with each other and the environment. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing with your friends. And I'll see you again soon for another adventure.